Hey, Karibu. I had a bad cold a few weeks ago and I'm just coming out of it. And I thought today I should give you a story on For Jesus, but tell it differently. I did the story and I have it here. I want to try something new in storytelling where I'm reading the story to you and see how it works. Yeah. Let's talk about For Jesus, one of the most unique historical man-made buildings in the world. Fort Jesus was built in Mombasa, right at the shores of the Indian Ocean, by the Portuguese in the late 16th century. It was constructed under the orders of the Portuguese king, Dom Felipe I, who wanted to secure Portuguese dominance in the Indian Ocean trade routes and protect their interests along the East African coast. Mombasa's location on the Indian Ocean made it a historical trading center, and it has been controlled by several countries over the years because of its strategic location. The Portuguese aim was to safeguard their trading routes, that is from India, the Middle East, and several parts of East Africa. Because of the location of Mombasa, it would be able to get to those different countries and continents by water easily. Another reason why it was built was to serve as a military fortress. The Portuguese faced competition and threats from rival powers, including Arab traders and Ottoman forces, who sought to control trade and influence the region, whereby they can secure the region with their own military backing, create a building, a structural design building that will be able to withstand any kind of invasion, and that is why it still stands today. It was built in 1593 and now we're in 2023. That's about 400 plus years, for 30 years old, and it still stands today. And you can be able to visit it and see how it was made and why it still stands today. I'm taking you guys there. So, Asante. I'm here and I'm about to get in.
Barren Africa, Barren Africa, Barren to Africa, Africa.
The fort is surrounded by high, thick walls made of coral stone, which are designed to withstand cannon fire and protect the interior from invaders. The fort contains a network of underground passages and storage areas. These tunnels were used to store ammunition and supplies, ensuring the fort's sustainability during a siege and providing protected access to various areas within the fort. The silent ammunition room, well, we are back. So I have a microphone plugged in the camera. So just listen and tell me how quiet you think this room is. So why was it called For Jesus? It was called For Jesus because the Portuguese were devout Catholics and religion at the time was the big thing. Their exploration and colonization intertwined with their religious beliefs, and that's why they named For Jesus after Jesus Christ.
Hey, Scotty. Jesus, man.
Slave trade was a significant part of the history of Fort Jesus during its occupation by different colonial powers. The specific years during which the slave trade was rampant at Fort Jesus can be broadly attributed to the period from the late 16th century to the early 19th century. That is about 200 to 300 years of slave trade, or thereabout, that happened in Fort Jesus. That is a lot of time. The fort was strategically located near the Swahili coast in Mombasa, which was a major hub for the capture and shipment of enslaved people from the interiors of East Africa to the coast. Arab traders were primarily responsible for the capture and enslavement of Africans, while European traders provided goods and weapons in exchange for enslaved individuals. Portuguese were Europeans, and so their work was to provide goods and weapons in exchange of getting slaves from the Arabs. And the reason why we are saying East Africa, because back then there were territories, we didn't have countries. So countries came about during colonization. And so in those territories, the East African side of it, so Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Southern Sudan, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Burundi, TZ, Mozambique, that was more or less East Africa. So they would get people from all those regions, all those areas, by force, kill the weakest people or leave them behind, and then grab the strongest people, take them to Mombasa and trade them off, get them into boats and take them to different territories globally that were run by the white people. Now, since 1593 to now we are in the year 2023, those are 430 years. For Jesus has changed hands multiple times. And I'm going to explain to you, I'm going to tell you how many times or who has been able to control for Jesus over what period of time over the years. It has changed hands 4 times, and I'm going to tell you when and how long and what they did. The first was in 1593 by the Portuguese, who initially built the building, and they controlled it until 1698. That is, they controlled it for about 105 years. In 1698, the fort was captured by the Omani Arabs, led by Said Said. The Omani Arabs held control over the fort until 19th century. So the Omanis controlled the fort for about 200 years, from 1698 to 1895. And then in 1895, by the British, during colonization, at the time they used to call themselves the British East Africa Protectorate, they also controlled Fort Jesus until 1963, when it was handed over to the Kenyan government, and since then it has been under the Kenyan government. So the first 3 colonial powers controlled the fort, and they also participated in slave trade. That is the Portuguese, the Omanis, and the British.
You know, you can imagine a situation whereby the slaves, their relatives would wait at the main gate there. The gate we use for coming in before being transported to Zanzibar. So this was their secret route. Wale ambao walikuwa wako hapa ndani ndio walikuwa wanajua the secret route. Also for weapons, also for their goods. It was a shorter distance to walk from there to the sea rather than using the other route. It was a longer route. You together. So we went down to check out the caves. We could go up to that gate which was closed 1895 by the British. Because wakati British walichukua hapo walikuwa wanatumia kama jela, and this prison, the British used this place as a prison, and most prisoners tried to escape. Some even escaped using that gate. So to avoid such problems, they closed it permanently. Mpaka wa leo haijafunguliwa.
Fort Jesus is next to the port of Mombasa, the old port of Mombasa, and so they moved the slaves through Fort Jesus to the port, and then they traded them to the buyers of different countries. Remember, back then there were no planes and there were no cars. The first motor car was built in 1880 something, 1886, about there. The first plane was in the early 1900s. And so back then, the best way to move long distance or to transport a huge load of cargo, back then slaves were cargo, was through boats. And because the fort is right at the beach, close to the port, it served very well as a place where you can just store slaves first and then transport them to the boats to wherever they're going to be taken in different parts of the world. And yeah, the fort has a very big significance in the history of slave trade. The abolition of the slave trade in the British Empire in the early 19th century and subsequent efforts to suppress the trade contributed to a decline in slave trade activities in the East African region. However, it is crucial to recognize that slavery persisted in different forms even after the abolition of the trade itself. Today, Fort Jesus stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a popular tourist attraction. It houses a museum that showcases artifacts, exhibitions, and displays that tell the story of Mombasa's history, including its Portuguese, Arab, and Swahili influences. The fort serves as a reminder of the turbulent history of East Africa's coastal trade. While you're in Mombasa, I would recommend you to visit Fort Jesus. It's not expensive. It's about 200 shillings for residents, Kenyans. For foreigners, is about $15 to $20, somewhere there. Tell me about your experience at Fort Jesus. I will see you next week. Have a good time. Next week? Yeah, next time. I'll see you next time.